So good evening to you all. But let me thank in particular Reverend Dr. Polo Ba'ai, for Principal of the Pacific Theological College, the faculty and students of USP and PTC, and of distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, but most of all, friends from the Pacific. Let me also, before I start, I just want to say particular thanks, if I may, to my countryman, Benjamin, from Milne Bay. We're from different parts of our big island, but yesterday was our 45th anniversary of our independence. And with many dreams, but also a lot of hard work facing our country in the decades to come. I was really touched when Reverend James Bhagwan said to me, would I come and be with you this evening and launch the books that have been so thoughtfully written. And I've not spent time with Pacific Theological College except for when I first arrived in Suva and had discussions with them. But my words will be raw and perhaps crass to some of you after the beauty and depth of my sister Konai's words and the thought that she puts into them. But it's timely that the thought-provoking publications, Reweaving the Ecological Framework towards an Ecological Framework for Development, Ecological Economic Accounts towards Intemerate Values, and from the deep Pasifiki Voices for a New Story are launched this evening. At the outset, allow me to acknowledge and commend the Reweaving the Ecological Map project for convening a valuable multi-stakeholder platform to thoroughly discuss alternative development paradigms that better align with our region's rich indigenous, ecological and spiritual values. The three publications are timely contribution to the development discourse in our Blue Pacific Continent. They offer a new development paradigm which places the interests of our heritage, our culture and our people at the heart of our development. And I'll briefly reflect on this and where we are at today in terms of regionalism and collective action in the Pacific region. We live in unprecedented times, and our region faces a three-pronged crisis. The COVID-19 health pandemic, which in turn has triggered an economic crisis, and thirdly, the ongoing climate crisis, which continues to bear down on our people on a daily basis. Indeed, crises such as these call into question the circumstances of our reality today and what the future may be for our people, our place and our prospects in our Blue Pacific continent. What is the future of a Blue Pacific region? To reflect on this question, let me cast back a little. In 2017, the forum leaders endorsed the Blue Pacific narrative as the core driver for collective action in support of their vision for a region of peace, harmony, and prosperity. The concept of the Blue Pacific is, of course, not new. Pacific voyagers have navigated their way across the Pacific Ocean for 1,000 years before their European counterparts began to venture into it, and well before political and economic boundaries were drawn and established. To recall the words of Prime Minister Malayalangoy from Samoa in 2017, the Pacific Ocean has provided our island communities their cultural and historical identity and attachment since time immemorial. It has been a major influence in the history of Pacific Island communities. Throughout the region, customary association with the sea forms the basis of present-day social structures. Livelihoods and tenure systems and traditional systems of stewardship governing its use. Building on this notion, exercising a sense of common identity and purpose linked to the ocean has been critical for protecting and promoting the potential of our shared Pacific Ocean. This commonality is the fundamental essence of our region, and consequently our Pacific Ocean has become a powerful catalyst in framing for Pacific regionalism. As aptly recognised in the opening words of the framework for Pacific regionalism, Pacific peoples are the custodians of the world's largest, most peaceful and abundant ocean, its many islands and its rich diversity of cultures. Building on this, the Blue Pacific identity harnesses the ocean as a driver of transformative change in the Pacific socio-cultural, political and economic development. Despite the chaos that has emerged as a consequence of COVID-19 pandemic, an opportunity has presented itself. The opportunity to rethink our development strategy and chart a new course. Reweaving the ecological MAT framework and ecological economic accounts towards Intemerate values presents an alternative narrative that challenges the age-old position that all that exists is simply to serve human civilization. It reaffirms the need to consider the full cost of development beyond its contributions to the gross domestic product of individual states. That is, the importance of considering its costs on our cultural values, social well-being and preservation of our natural environment. The two publications contend that we need to move away from this and rebalance our narrative by infusing it with our Pacific consciousness and its inextricable link to our environment and cultural norms. This will allow us to embrace fit-for-purpose economies that are scaled to our needs, sustaining communities and strengthening resilience through our traditional roles as stewards and custodians of our natural surroundings. I am intrigued by the notion and possibility of not only exploring an alternative development pathway, but adopting an ecological approach towards accounting for development. Indeed, this approach could eventually reorient our economic trajectory away from an over-reliance on foreign aid and financing, which in my view has been a negative force for our island economies. Ladies and gentlemen, regionalism is fundamentally about working together where it matters most. In reflecting on the publications today, perhaps one could offer that for our Blue Pacific continent, the ecological biodiversity of our shared ocean space is where it matters most. The ecology of our vast ocean, forests and natural environment underpins our well-being as Pacific peoples. Our cultural well-being is inseparable from our ocean ecology. Our food security is dependent on it. Our economies are driven by it, whether that be in the form of tuna fisheries, tourism, ecosystems, or biodiversity. Therefore, if I were to reflect again on my initial question, what is the future of the Blue Pacific region? Perhaps an answer on the viability of our oceanic future could lie in the protection of and accounting for our shared ecological biodiversity. An important step to protect and accounting for our shared ecological biodiversity is the securing of our maritime zones. To this end, I have had the distinct pleasure of joining the region in a collective discussion over the last week to strategize the steps towards developing international law that would ensure that members' maritime zones are set in perpetuity and cannot be challenged or reduced as a result of sea level rise and climate change. This journey is not a short one, and it will take years to crystallise and progress. However, collective and consistent advocacy will remain key to its success. And I was most excited by the depth of knowledge of young people and senior people in terms of what they've been doing in their island countries to contribute to the development of customary international law in this sphere. And Secretary Generals don't often always sit through full meetings, but I sat still for 2.5 days and just loved every minute of the learning that I gained at my age. Let me now turn to the publication From the Deep, Pasifiki Voices for a New Story. Presented a collection of reflections on how the region can rise from the opportunity of this pandemic. For me personally, it has prompted me to examine my own conscience about what appropriate development paths are as a region. The visions of the various contributors demonstrate the richness of our Pacific in terms of our belief systems, our cultural context, and the life experiences and stories we all have, which are similar yet diverse. And it was wonderful to see names of people that I knew from my part of the world in Melanesia, but also people that I've got to know since I've come to live here. In reflecting upon the diverse essays captured in that publication, the thought did occur to me on whether returning to the cultural norms of the past would satisfy our youth. Would it satisfy our women folk? But I think the edge was an answer for the youth. Yes, the collective impact of COVID-19 has reawakened our senses. We've been forced to explore and utilise alternate methods and modalities to progress our work and convene our stakeholders. Consequently, it is clear that we cannot and will not be returning to business as usual post-COVID-19. There will be fundamental shifts in development relations which will underpin the recovery of our economies moving forward, and that will depend on what our economies look like. We must seize the opportunity to place the health and well-being of our peoples and environment at the centre of recovery and development plans moving forward. In parallel, we must remain aware and alert to the geostrategic and geopolitical shifts that continue to evolve rapidly around us. A pertinent question that I continue to ask is, how can we maintain our own sovereign and strategic autonomy in the face of ongoing global power struggles? Most especially at times such as this, when we increasingly witness bilateral engagements over multilateral ones, much of it pursuing strategic interests. This is the biggest challenge to the collective, and we should pay great attention to this. It would seem wise to leverage competing actors across each other in order to seek the funding and infrastructure that individual states need. However, I would offer that it would be a grave oversight if we did not recognise the unprecedented opportunity the current historical moment provides for us to work together collectively and continue to emphasise the solidarity of the Blue Pacific Continent that is required. At a more operational level in the region, the Pacific Islands Forum invoked the Bikatawa Declaration to establish the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway on COVID-19, which has supported the movement of medical supplies, technical assistance, and personnel across the Forum member countries. So where to from here? and let me talk about the 2050 strategy. Indeed, the many challenges and contestations within our region propel leaders' collective recognition of the long-term and strategic potential for establishing an instrumental political bloc and a viable Blue Pacific continent. It was against this backdrop that Forum leaders endorsed the development of a 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent at their meeting in Tuvalu last year. Securing the future of our Blue Pacific cannot be left to chance. It requires a long-term vision for our Pacific region and the will to work together to achieve it. Our strategic value lies with our peoples, our place in this great ocean continent, and our prospects and for the future. In framing the 2050 strategy, leaders agreed that it must ensure social, cultural, environmental, and economic integrity, sovereignty and security across our Blue Pacific continent. It should promote inclusivity and equality, ensuring that the voices of women and youth are heard. The innovative thinking and visioning espoused in the publications being launched today provoke much thought and at a timely juncture in this region's journey. I hope that the works launched today will breathe life into our communities and shape their thinking now and into the future. A lot of us may not be here in 2050. However, as our region contemplates its future direction, it is vital now, more than ever, that we, as custodians of the Blue Pacific, are thinking about our shared future. We are shaping the narrative, we are framing our region according to how we view ourselves and not through the lens or political constructs of others. Friends, before I conclude, may I once again offer my warmest congratulations to the authors, editors, and contributors of the 3 publications being launched here today. I hope that your vision does not end here and you continue to offer that thought-provoking vision and ideology to continue to prompt our policymakers and political leaders in our region. And I would recommend that these documents and these publications are submitted to the 2050 subcommittee of the forum. On that note, perhaps this is also an apt opportunity to offer one of my many takeaways from my tenure as Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum. As you are all aware, inclusivity in regional policy development and priority setting has been a key issue that I have sought to drive during my tenure, and Francis has mentioned this. Whilst we have come a long way in this area, we still have a long way to go to ensure that these dialogue mechanisms are not only embedded in the regional architecture, but also contribute meaningfully to the leaders' discussions. And that is what I've tried to set in place during the Pacific Island Forum itself. These publications are a testament to the valuable and differentiated perspective that people in the Pacific have and can offer the regional policy development process, and I encourage you to continue to do this. Do not be silent with your ideas and your thoughts, and bring them forward when you can. In saying that, I also fully recognize and reaffirm that at the end of the day, the fundamental importance to our leaders' vision for a Blue Pacific continent is the solidarity of the members of the Blue Pacific. We are all stewards of the great ocean, and we are all accountable to those who came before us and those who will come after us. From a very personal perspective, I actually come from mountain country. The highest mountain in the valley near me is 15,500 feet. So as Ocean Commissioner, I've always said I take my responsibility very, very seriously, because it's about from the highlands to the high seas, and how important it is that we are all interrelated. But in conclusion, to turn once again to Epeli Hauofa's words, we are the sea, We are the ocean, and we must wake up to this ancient truth. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope if anyone's got questions at some point, you can ask me. But thank you again, and I wish you well. But before I conclude it, I'm supposed to say that these books, I now declare these books officially launched. Thank you.